funeral in Florida. The judge denied that request again, telling her to sit down, to which Haber responded, she does not like being spoken to in that way by the judge. On the stand yesterday, E. Jean Carroll testified about the sexual abuse she says she suffered at the hands of Donald Trump and how speaking about it in 2019 ruined her reputation and damaged her career. Carroll said after then-President Trump denied the allegations and called her a liar, she began to receive hundreds of messages a day echoing Trump's words, many including death threats. Carroll's attorney even showed social media posts Trump made just yesterday morning before court, continuing to attack Carroll and the court. Carroll and her attorneys are seeking at least $10 million in damages. Let's bring in former litigator, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin, and Justice Department reporter for the New York Times, Katie Benner. Good morning to you both. Lisa, good to have you back with us, as you seem to be every morning talking about another bizarre day in court, where Donald Trump seems to be trying to instigate some kind of a fight with the judge so he can later claim that he was biased against him or whatever he's going to say for his own politics. Take us inside the courtroom. What was it like yesterday?
Willie, yesterday was, as Mika said, spicy. And just as somebody who experienced it, I have a lot of heartburn. When I think about yesterday and what went on, in the course of a day, Trump's defense team moved for a mistrial, asked for the judge to be recused, and tried to bring out in their cross-examination of E. Jean Carroll not one, but two examples of potentially unlawful things that she had done. One, they accused her of spoiling evidence in the case, which was cut off by Judge Kaplan. And then they even tried to insinuate that she has an unlicensed gun and that it is illegal to possess an unlicensed gun in the state of New York. Why did that even come up? Because E. Jean Carroll has testified that she sleeps with that gun beside her bed for self-protection, because in the wake of all these online threats coming from people who have names like Sports Justice, she doesn't know where the threat is going to come from and therefore fears for her physical safety.
So what about this back and forth between the judge, Judge Kaplan, and Donald Trump and his team, which is to say, Judge Kaplan said, you can't do that in a courtroom. I know you think the rules don't apply to you, former President Trump. Yep. You can't be disruptive. You can't interrupt. You can't do all the things that you're doing. Where does that lead if the former president continues to behave that way, which he's doing intentionally, we know, so that he can say this judge is biased against me?
He's absolutely doing it intentionally. And at one point, you know, one of the things that wasn't picked up in some of the reporting was when Kaplan said to him, before the recess, you just can't help yourself under the circumstances, can you? Trump walked out, and there was a lot of crosstalk. It was difficult to hear, but apparently, according to the Associated Press and others, he shot back, nor can you, or you can't either. Trump seems to think he's in a battle of wills with an equal. Alina Habba does too, right? Telling the judge, I really don't like to be spoken to like that. But I think what is most threatening to Donald Trump is he doesn't know what Kaplan is going to do next, because Kaplan hasn't made a specific threat. He said, I can eject you from the courtroom, but Trump doesn't know whether Kaplan will fine him or hold him in contempt, bar him from testifying. There are any number of measures that Kaplan can take, and the fact that he hasn't been clear about which one he will choose is what is keeping Trump as much in line as he has been, even though his conduct is unbecoming of any person in a courtroom.
And Mika, the court reporter's transcript shows that this is exactly what Donald Trump wants, is this fight when Judge Kaplan says, quote, Mr. Trump, I hope I don't have to consider excluding you from the trial, or at least from the presence. I understand you're probably very eager for me to do that. Trump replied, quote, I would love it. Just saying out loud what he's trying to do here.
You know, Katie Benner, it's, to me, I ask, does he really care about what's going on in the trial, or does he want to just get in there to make trouble, to continue to defame E. Jean Carroll? He's in there again because he continued to defame her after losing a case against this woman. So are the tactics to show up, to drum up the base? Because, again, we've seen data that shows these legal actions against Donald Trump, whether they be indictments or civil cases, seem to tighten support for him.
You know, I think it's hard to be in Trump's head, but you're right. There's data that shows two things. First, to your point, that a lot of support comes out of the woodwork when he goes into the courtroom. He can spin these things. He can kind of create outcomes. And when that doesn't work, he can just say whatever it is that he wants about the procedures, whether or not there's truth there. So you're right. It helps his supporters. And two, this is a very personal battle for him. And it is intimidating to E. Jean Carroll for him to be there. And she talked a lot about the kinds of threats that she received from the moment she first talked about the alleged assault, which has been ruled by another court to have happened. So those threats, I think we cannot underestimate, and we can't look away from, because not only did E. Jean Carroll testify about them very clearly, these are the kinds of threats that members of the Republican Party, House members, members of the Senate also get when they defy Donald Trump. They don't have the same sort of overtones of gender bias and of gender discrimination and of horrible sexism, but the threats are real and they're really, really violent. So when she talks about the way that she feels, this is how anybody who defies Donald Trump feels. And it really helps to understand why he's able to garner the kind of public support he has from people who privately talk about how much they think he should not be president again.
Well, I mean, Mitt Romney yesterday asked by a CNN reporter what he thought about the Iowa results. And he said, well, I don't understand the Republican Party. I don't understand my party. They're supporting a guy who raped a woman. And of course, that's what the judge said. And this is just ask Mitt Romney about the Iowa caucus entrance poll showing that a majority of GOP caucus didn't believe Biden was elected legitimately. This is what Mitt said. I think a lot of people in this country are out of touch with the reality and will accept anything Donald Trump tells them. You had a jury that said Donald Trump raped a woman, and that doesn't seem to be moving the needle. There's a lot of things about today's electorate that I have a hard time understanding.
You know, my cousin Matthew went to a Trump event in New Hampshire and just wrote me this long email about how gobsmacking it was that no matter what Trump said, it seemed the audience would just take it completely at face value, no matter how ridiculous, no matter how obvious a lie it was like a religious event. It was like a cult event. They were loving everything he was saying, most of it completely untrue, out of whack, crazy talk. And we'll be right back. Border security. Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida crystallized how House Republicans are just playing cynical politics with the issue.
If you listen to my colleagues, you would think the world didn't begin until President Biden was elected. You would think it was dinosaurs, the wheel, Jesus, the world was flat, the world was round, Biden was elected, every problem. Like nothing happened before. In fact, President Obama deported more people in each term than President Trump. Well, hold on a second. If the border wasn't a problem until President Biden was elected, then how were we deporting all of these people in administrations before Trump was elected? It's because this situation has been going on for decades. So stop lying to the American people that none of this happened until President Biden was elected. Just listen to the speaker, who was caught on a call the other day saying that we can't solve the border crisis until after the election. By the way, here's Congressman Troy Niels giving it all away. Giving it all away. Let's read this. Let me tell you, when he's talking about immigration, let me tell you, I'm not willing to do a darn thing right now to help a Democrat, to help Joe Biden's approval rating. I will not help the Democrats try to improve this man's dismal approval ratings. I'm not going to do it. He's saying he's not going to do anything on the border. And he's from Texas, which needs help. I'm willing to do stuff on the border. I'm willing to do it. But they're not willing to do it because they're doing what people hate about this place. They want to use it to raise money. They want to use it to politicize it. But they don't want to solve the issue. There's a deal on the table. They can solve the issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Saying the quiet part out loud in some ways. I mean, Jackie, when it comes to border security, there actually is quite a lot of agreement, as we've seen, between Republicans and Democrats. Yes, Republicans want some measures that are more stringent, but you have Democrats in the House and in the Senate saying, absolutely, we have to do something on border security. Where does this leave, though, the issue of Ukraine? Because I keep hearing from senators that they're confident that America will not abandon the Ukrainians. They know what that would do to allies around the world, and they know the cost of doing that. But I'm listening to the House, and I just don't... maybe you hear it, but I'm not hearing that this is something that they're prepared to do because they don't want to give the president any kind of win.
You're absolutely right. That's something that we can't underestimate here. The political imperative of House Republicans, people like Troy Nehls and Bob Good, who have outright said we don't want to give Biden this political win, and that's going to dictate our vote. There are also people who have continued to say that we're not going to continue to fund Ukraine, pointing to some of what they believe to be misspending on part of Zelensky and the Ukrainian forces. But when Mike Johnson walked out of that meeting at the White House yesterday with Chuck Schumer, House Intelligence members, Jake Sullivan, Avril Haines, and Joe Biden, he did acknowledge that he came out thinking that we need to continue to assist Kyiv in some capacity. And I think that at the end of the day, if the House has to ultimately vote on something on this package that McConnell has said is going to make it through potentially next week, that it's going to put Republicans in a jam. You know, it's hard, I think, to look at people like Mark Green and members on the Homeland Security issue who are bringing in the parents of people who have been killed by migrants and trying to argue that they need to impeach Mayorkas while also trying to kill a border bill that Lindsey Graham is saying is the best thing that lawmakers have seen in years, and that having a discussion about border security without a pathway to citizenship is almost unheard of and something that would never get done in a potential future Trump administration. So I think what you saw yesterday is a prelude to this potential jam that Mike Johnson is going to face next week with his members.
Willie, think about this. Jackie brings up such a great point. They want to impeach Mayorkas because they say there's not order at the border. And then they say, we're not going to do anything to fix the border because it may also help Joe Biden politically. So they're impeaching a guy for chaos at the border. They got the most conservative border security bill ever, according to Lindsey Graham, according to John Thune, according, my God, to James Langford, one of the most conservative members in all of the Senate from Oklahoma, running this show. Again, has been anti-Biden since day one. And they say, we're not going to do anything. The House, the comrades in the House say, we're not going to do anything to fix the border. Talk about hypocrisy just laid out for everybody to see. I hope those impeachment hearings are televised because they're going to be fun as hell to watch.
So there is chaos. There is a crisis at the border. Republicans, Democrats get together on the Senate side and say, yes, there is. We've identified the problem. Here's what we propose to do about it. The House rejects it because it's so important to them that Donald Trump return to the White House, that Joe Biden doesn't get a win, that they won't take the solution they've been begging for how long. The other side of this, of course, John, we're talking about the politics of this, is it'd be a shame to let this moment pass. There is a crisis at the border. It's an untenable situation. Here's a moment, a rare moment. It comes around like once a decade where you might get something done that both parties could agree on about immigration. And it looks like the House is willing to let that opportunity slide in defense of Donald Trump.
Yeah, and White House officials recognize something has to get done at the border. They have changed their tune in recent months. They're willing to go pretty far, to the point where there are some in the Biden orbit that are anxious of how progressives will react, but they're willing to make the deal. I think the progressives will eventually stay home. John Thune is right. I think he said it very well. He's being very clear-eyed about the politics of this. If the Republicans wait for Trump, to come back to office and that they have majorities in both houses, the Democrats are going to make their lives very difficult and exact far more concessions than they're willing to right now. Right. This is the best deal they're going to get. And the Republicans in the Senate, you can see that. You can see even the frustration on their faces. And again, most Republicans in the Senate also do want to help Ukraine, and Mitch McConnell among them. And this is a deal. White House officials I spoke to last night after the meeting, they weren't quite as enthusiastic as Schumer, who came out there really trying to spin it. This is the closest we've been to a deal. But they do think that Johnson will eventually have to cave, that he'll make some sort of agreement. He'd be willing to make some sort of compromise because the blowback would be so hard the other way if he doesn't, Joe and Mika. But this isn't done just yet. And and we have a government funding shutdown deadline looming tomorrow night that's complicating things further. There's also a snowstorm coming to Washington that's going to accelerate the timetable here because it may not be able to have votes tomorrow. But they're not at to use the football analogy, they're not at the 5-yard line, but they are moving down the field, and time is of the essence.
Up next, we'll dig into a new piece has been deplorable, beyond deplorable. And his followers are vulnerable to disinformation and also to his cult-style leadership. Let's bring in political columnist for New York Magazine, Jonathan Chait. He's out this morning with a new piece entitled, "Do You Remember the Ecstasy of Electing Joe Biden? How the coalition that defeated Donald Trump crumbled." And Jonathan, you write in part, quote, "It's imperative to keep Trump out of the Oval Office has become tiresome."
The imperative, yeah.
The imperative. Many issues have strained the alliance of convenience between Biden and the left. But what has caused the schism between Biden and the left to crack wide open is the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Political passion is all on the side of extremism. Normalcy feels spent, enervating, and this has encouraged former members of the anti-Trump coalition to gravitate toward other concerns that animate them. An important number of Americans who once found Trump intolerable have either forgotten how awful he is or have some strange craving for his return. Biden is often described as lacking energy, but it is not the president who is exhausted. It is us.
I wonder, Jonathan, J.B. Lass wrote in The Bulwark that the more people see Donald Trump, the more they're reminded of Donald Trump. I will say, I think the more they see this Donald Trump that they haven't seen in 4 years, and that's for those of us that don't talk about politics for 4 hours a day or write about it like 12 hours a day, they're going to see actually a more radical, a more exhausted, more tired, more spent Donald Trump playing the hits from 8 years ago. I'm not so sure that's going to age too well. Maybe I'm whistling past the graveyard. I don't think so. But you bring up a great point, really great point about what the Israel-Hamas war has done to the base of the Democratic Party.
Right, and not just that. There's this very paradoxical response that's come out of this crisis, which is that the most pro-Israel moderates and the most anti-Israel leftists have all decided that what they want from this is to elect Donald Trump, right? The left is saying we need to punish Joe Biden for supporting Israel, and we're going to elect Donald Trump, and we'll live with that. And a lot of Israel hawks, kind of in the political center, are also saying, see all these leftists who hate Joe Biden, that means we have to elect Donald Trump to punish them somehow. So somehow people with opposite views are all driving towards this same outcome of Donald Trump. And I think that's symptomatic of this broader phenomenon I'm trying to identify, which is that people have gotten tired of the central imperative of keeping Donald Trump out of the White House and are sort of marinating in these smaller grievances.
Let's talk about young voters especially. I mean, if you look at TikTok, it is absolutely cluttered with what I consider to be misinformation about the Israeli-Hamas war. I think a lot of progressives may not feel the same way. Jonathan, aren't you fairly confident that as we move closer to the election, and again, Donald Trump is saying more and more radical things, that whether it's TikTok or Instagram Reels or whether it's X, whatever social media younger voters get their information from, it's actually going to be jammed packed with clips of Donald Trump saying, I was the one who terminated Roe v. Wade. I'm the one this, I'm the one that, and, talking about vermin and sort of all these statements with fascist overtones.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly take your point, and look, there are 10 months to go to the election, so I couldn't say that where we are now is where we'll be in November. But I think we have to be realistic about where we are now. It's not a tight election. Trump is winning in the swing states. The last poll I saw in Georgia, he was up by what, 8 points in Georgia, and 5, 6 points in places like Michigan. So where we are now is Trump winning. So what I try to do is assess the kind of cultural political moment of what's happening now, what brought us to this point now, and then you can try to figure out what's going to happen between now and November to change that.
You know who agrees with the concept that President Biden has a base problem? President Biden's reelection campaign. They're pretty candid, Molly. They actually feel pretty good about where they are with independent and swing voters, which is not usually where an election is fought, this far out. That's where usually that's the contest. And right now, to all the points we've just been making, they feel like those voters aren't going to break back to Trump. They are worried about turnout and base. Young people, voters of color, progressives. What's your read on that? Are those people... They're not going to vote for Trump, but they might stay home. Do you think Biden can do enough to get them to turn out again come November, whether with some sort of positive message or just scaring the crap out of them about Donald Trump?
Well, they're going to need to, right? Because this is the do you want to have elections election. So they are going to need to fight for those voters. I do think that there is an opportunity. Look, Biden has tried with student debt. That's a really big issue to a lot of people. I think that they'll be able to get back there to those voters, and I think that they will get there, and it is 10 months. I would say, like, when you look at turnout, right, if we're going to talk about the Iowa caucuses, right, Trump did really well, but it's, 70,000 less people turned out than they did in 2016, right? So it was about 100,000 people voting for him. And this is a guy who won on turnout, right? On turning out voters who don't usually turn out. So I think it's worth thinking, like, this is a guy running on the zeal of the base. And if the base is, like, not going to go out because it's snowing in Iowa, where it usually snows, I think that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, it really is. And you're talking about the base, the zeal of the base, the zeal of the Democratic base is mainly progressive. And Eddie, I'm an old line conservative. And yet I've noted over the past 4 years on this show, progressives who are usually attacked in the media, mainstream media is sort of having their heads in the clouds and, being Marxist, this, that, and the other, and not being realistic. I've noted that progressives, both in Congress and across America, have shown an extraordinary amount of discipline, hanging tight with Joe Biden, hanging tight with whether it's Speaker Pelosi or whether it's Schumer, when the party moved noticeably to the center. And I guess the question is, and why I think Jonathan's article is so important, is the real question is, will progressives who have already shown a lot of discipline over the past 4 years, will they continue that over the next year and deliver the political death blow to Donald Trump?
My gut, Joe, is that they will. We will. But there has to be organizing. It's not enough just simply to put forward policies, right? There has to be organizing on the ground. There has to be a flood of GOTV money in areas so that we can turn out young voters and voters of color, as it were. The internal debates around what's happening in Gaza, the internal debates around student loan forgiveness and a range of progressive policies, that's going to happen. But I think this question around the fate of our democracy, the state of the republic, that looms large. And I think the progressive wing of the party understands the stakes, and they're going to act accordingly. But that doesn't come without critique, without trying to push the Biden administration in a certain direction and hold it accountable to its promises. And that's to be expected. But I do think let me speak for me in this moment, I understand the stakes of the moment.
Yeah, and Jonathan Shade, I'll ask you the same thing in closing. The Biden administration had listening sessions actually inside the White House with younger workers who had real concerns about Israel and Gaza. I'm wondering, what does the Biden administration need to do to get the progressive base energized, since that's where the real ground game comes from in November?
It's a very tricky problem. First of all, I think President Biden is conducting his foreign policy on foreign policy grounds. He's not conducting his Israel policy as an election issue. I think he actually cares about the issue and is trying to do what he thinks is best, whether it's right or wrong. Second of all, but analyzing it politically, he's in a vice, because to the extent he moves closer to what the base wants, he moves further from what the center wants. So he really is facing demands to move further from the center of public opinion on political grounds. So I'm not really sure there is a political solution for him, except to the extent that he can actually put this war to rest and get it out of the headlines and get it, out of people's heads and get them focusing more on issues where I think he has a more solid chance of unifying his coalition.
And we'll be right back.
January 26th. Joining us now, the man who plays Wilson, Ian McShane. He also is the film's executive producer. Ian, it's so great to have you here.
Thanks for asking me. I watch the show all the time.
Well, thank you.
It's nice to see you in person.
Well, it's an honor to have you through the screen and at the table this time. So tell us about this film that's been kind of a long time coming, with a director that you had worked with previously, got together, came up with the script. Not a bad place to shoot a film, by the way, it looks like.
Well, he lives there. He lives there, and part of the legend of this place, Fuerteventura, Fierce Wind Island in the Canaries, is this American ship, the American Star, which actually disintegrated there while it was being towed somewhere else, a luxury line from the 30s. And this was sort of the premise for the metaphor for crumbling apart as a man's life, etc. We prefer to say, like, he's a government operative, not a hired killer, but he used to be in the Navy, he used to be in the Army, and the young boy. And it's a gig that goes wrong. I mean, the first rule of a man like that is you go in, you do the job, and you leave instantly. And he's forced to stay for bad intel, and that's when his mistake starts. He meets a few people, gets interested in the place, and knows he's committed his own cardinal sin, in a sense. And what ensues is, well, you see the movie.
And there's a good bit of action in here, from what I can see.
Yeah,
you kick some butt, as
a little bit, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm ashamed from the John Wick movies. And I said, can I do something to somebody instead of being there, charming and smart, sitting there all the time saying, Jonathan, whatever.
And so, Ian, you've done so much in your career. What compels you these days to take on a project that's going to consume 1.5 years of your life? What has to be there for you to take the job?
Well, I don't know. It's like, English actors, we do, we like to work. I mean, I like to go from stage to theatre to TV. It's always been the way. Like, I'd worked with him before in another... an undiscovered movie, really, called Hollow Point, with Patrick Wilson, John Leguizamo and me, which we made 5 years ago, and that's what inspired. He said, I want to work with you again, so do I, and he came up with this idea, and it took us 4 years to get the script together, and I did a movie called Jawbone with this producer called Mike Elliott, and I showed him the script, we got together, and then in 22, we had this opportunity, this window of financial opportunity, otherwise they say, you got the money for a amount of time, otherwise we're moving it somewhere else. There you go. Yeah, so we made it in that time period of spring 2022. And here we are. I mean, it's lovely making an independent film because there's nobody over your shoulder. And very proud. I mean, every morning you could go to this hotel. And we lived in the hotel we filmed at, which is one of those all-in European hotels, package. You wear a bracelet which denotes if you've paid for, if you can drink all day or if you only breakfast or whatever. It's very cool.
We'll see if that comes through on screen. Yeah. So certainly it seems as if the island itself is a real character in the film.
It is part of the...
Tell us more about that.
Well, because it's like he goes there and he's attracted to the place. He has to stay for a day, and it's like he likes it. And he makes the mistake of being involved with somebody who approaches him, and unexpected things happen. And we have the great French actress, Fanny Ardant, Madame Truffaut, who came with us and plays the girl's mother for a couple of days. And it was just being in a civilized place. I mean, you get up every morning, have breakfast, go to work. When the sun came down, you go back with the crew. We'd all get together, have dinner, good night, see you in the morning. And after 5 weeks, we all went home. It's like, instead of charging around, you know, films, and American or British, when it's all under the cosh, you have 17 people looking after your every move in case they think, well, they think actors are children anyway. You leave the set, where's he going to? Where's he going? Where's he going?
Somebody with a headset holding your hand.
There's always somebody following you everywhere.
Mr. McShane is moving. He's moving.
You know, exactly. He's moving. He's on the move. Where's he going?
We were talking in the break about the wonderful show Deadwood that was on HBO, for which you won the Golden Globe, nominated for Emmys, and it got all the praise it deserved, as did you. Does that feel like, not just in your life, but in the media landscape a lifetime ago, when that HBO, they said, oh my gosh, TV can be this good. It can be Deadwood, it can be The Wire, it can be The Sopranos. Not that there isn't great stuff now, because of course there is, but there's so much and it's so disparate, and its streaming has changed everything.
Well, then HBO was the only sort of game in town, in a sense, and they had this sort of reputation as they always did it, producing classy materials. And we were lucky enough to be part of that. I mean, can you believe it's 22 years?
I couldn't believe that when I saw that.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. But, I mean, at the time, I mean, The Wire was... We came in at a funny time. I mean, Deadwood was a show that was, you know, if you like, a sort of a revisionist Western. But it was much more than that. I mean, it was the story of the beginning of America. It's a shame it didn't go on for longer, but, you know, the 3 seasons we had were the 3 seasons we had. David Milch is a bit of a genius. Walter Hill directed the pilot. You got the chance to work with all those fabulous actors in it, you know, and everybody. And really, we all did pretty well together. And for the 3 years, it was one of the best periods of my life, I think, work-wise, and, you know, apart from driving up the 401 every day. That was a bit of a pain in the ass, which everybody has to go through.
We can tell you prefer to stay in the hotel where you're shooting, not get in the car and have to drive anywhere.
And we'll be right back. Starting Forbes and Know Your Values 50 over 50 lists, which recognize women who have achieved significant success after the age of 50. Well, after women are shattering age and gender norms all around the world. And last night, we released our 3rd annual 50 over 50 Asia Pacific list. It comes on the heels of our U.S. list and our Europe, Middle East, and Africa lists, which came out just last week. Here to tell us more, editor of Forbes Women, Maggie McGrath, and vice chair of the Forbes and Know Your Value 3050 Summit, Huma Abedin. She's an MSNBC analyst. Maggie, this year's honorees come from 14 different countries and territories and work across 28 different sectors. Give us an overview of the diverse list. And also, one of our main sort of call-outs in this group includes a tech entrepreneur who introduced digital maps to India well before Google. Who is she?
That's absolutely right, Nika. Well, to start with the overview, thanks to our colleagues in Forbes Asia, we have uncovered 50 women who are uncovering fashion, finance, science. We have the incoming head of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, Bonnie Chan, and we also have one of our eldest ever listees. That is 112-year-old Salimirata Timaka. She's an environmental advocate in India. She had angioplasty in the fall, and when she came out of the hospital, she said she was still wanted to plant more trees. But elsewhere in India is the woman that you referenced. That's 67-year-old Rashmi Verma. She's the co-founder and CTO of CE Infosystems. It's better known as Map My India, and it's like Google Maps, but she and her husband co-founded it in 1995. That's a full 10 years before anyone knew what Google Maps were. She started by mapping India's cities by foot, and to date, she has tracked more than 6.6 million kilometers of roads, 18 million locations. Wow. The company is worth $1.4 billion. It's free to consumers, but it makes its money by licensing its data to its corporate clients.
Impressive. And Huma, also making the list, was 96-year-old actress Lisa Liu. Many of us know her from the hit film Crazy Rich Asians. Tell us why she made the list.
Well, Nika, you keep telling us that our runway is long, and forget 50 at 96. She has spent 5 decades in an extraordinary award-winning acting career. And as you referenced, Crazy Rich Asians, which was a global phenomenon a few years ago. She also appeared at 66 in the Joy Luck Club. I remember I was a teenager when that film came out. And she didn't even start acting until she was 31 and was so kind of intent on perfecting her craft that she became known as One Take Lisa. And it's an example of, you know, you can, and I try to do this intentionally, Mika, because, you know, I freak out all the time that I don't have enough time and you keep reminding me.
Right.
We need to keep looking at stories like Lisa Liu to be inspired.
Absolutely. Maggie, another honoree on the Asia Pacific list, 55-year-old Australian singer Kylie Minogue, who is really, she's going through an incredible career resurgence. Talk about her impact.
Well, if you have had the song Padam Padam stuck in your head at any point over the last 7 months, you are well aware of Kylie Minogue's impact. But it's true. She is 55 years old and having a career resurgence. That song came out over the summer. It hit the UK's Radio 1 playlist, and she became the first woman over 50 to have a song on that playlist. It's her first #1 hit in over a decade. It earned her a Grammy nomination in November. And also in the fall, she embarked upon her first ever Vegas residency. When tickets went on sale in August, they immediately sold out. So she is hotter than ever, but she has said that for as much as this moment means to her, she hopes it means a lot for women who experience age bias themselves. And she has said, I think we're in a moment where it's not cool to be ageist. People are over it. And Mika, I think you, Huma, and I would agree with that statement.
Absolutely. And let's turn now. I mentioned our 3rd annual cross-generational 3050 Summit, which will take place in March in and around International Women's Day, which is March 8th. We've already announced some great speakers, including personal finance expert, I'm obsessed, Susie Orman, actress Meg Ryan. Today, we have a few more names that are ready to be announced. Huma, who are they?
Well, we are very excited we've been looking forward to this day, all 3 of us and all of our teams at Forbes and Know Your Value. The first is Sophie Gregoire Trudeau. She is an author, a mental health and emotional literacy advocate. I think many Americans know her in her role as the former unofficial First Lady of Canada. And Sophie's story, and one of the reasons we're very excited to have her join us as a speaker at the summit, is she has a book coming out this spring called Closer Together. And she's been talking about mental health for the past 20 years, well before it was a sexy topic, certainly in America and around the world. And being very honest about her own challenges with eating disorders and anxiety growing up as a young woman. And she really champions this notion of emotional literacy, that, you know, she teaches us that we teach our children math and languages and science growing up, but do we talk to them about how to deal with their emotions and their feelings? And when they feel pain, how can you sit with pain and not be overwhelmed? And that some of the root causes, she in fact tells us that 70% of our mental health challenges start when we're children, and how to address that. And the second speaker we're very, very excited to announce, we're very actually honored to announce, our 2024 Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, who is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Every little girl should know who Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is. She is the former president of Liberia. She made history as the first democratically elected female head of state in Africa. And one of the reasons she's so important for this year, Mika, is we're surrounded by conflict globally. She became president after a decades-long civil war in her country. She led the country through reconciliation and rehabilitation. She was an extraordinary leader for her country, and she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 for her work. And she continues to be a global champion for women around the world, particularly women in Africa. And we cannot wait to have her join us on stage in Abu Dhabi in March.
Stick with us. Another